everybody. Welcome. And I've got with me our two newest enterprise DNA experts, Gaelim Holland and George Mount. And today, what we wanted to do was to talk about the prospect of learning a second language to go with Power BI. But before we do, I wanted to introduce both of them. What we typically do is kind of scour the world looking for the best experts and people whose content we really enjoy. And Gaelim and George are two of those people and have expertise that really fits in with some of the course offerings that we've been looking to present. So wanted to give each of those guys a chance to just tell you a little bit about their background before we dive into the discussion today. So Gaelim, why don't you start us off?
Sure. So, hi, everybody. I'm Gaelim. I guess my background is I actually started out as a biologist and quickly realized, you can't make money that way. So I shifted over to analytics. But, I feel like those two disciplines have a lot in common. I mean, to do anything in science, you really need to be good at statistics and have the fundamentals of math. So, it was an easy transition. So I've been working in data analytics, data science for probably the last 15 years. I've been lucky enough to kind of work in small and large organizations. So, I guess I know some of the benefits of working in both those environments. And I also been lucky enough to kind of work in different cultures. I've worked in a few different countries. And I'm a big fan of Power BI, big fan of, data analytics, and a big fan of Python.
Great. George?
Yes, I'm George Mount. I will be doing the R for Power BI courses. My background started in finance, but I think along with a lot of people, just found I was not sufficiently skilled in data and data analysis. So that set me on a journey, starting from let me blog what I learned in Excel that day, all the way to now, about 10 years later. Recently published a book. You see the bling back there. I've got a copy here, Advancing in Analytics from Excel. Yeah, from Excel to Python and R. I operate a data consultancy of my own and really specializing in helping that type of person who is in a job where they are the unwitting data analyst and they're asking, what do I do next? Hopefully I can get them to the point where they do get excited and do see that learning something like Python or R is certainly within their realm. So I'm sure we'll talk about that now.
Great. And, part of the reason I really was interested in having this discussion with you guys is neither of you are dogmatic about this. Gaelim said, he likes Python, but I know he uses and knows R. George, I know you're doing the R course, but no Python. Your book covers both. And so, I think, there's the chance here to have a really balanced discussion. I think sometimes people get, kind of one extreme or the other. And I think you guys have a really good perspective in terms of looking at the strengths and weaknesses of both. But before we get into that, I wanted to just talk about kind of the use case for why you think learning a second language, be it Python or R, is important for, would you say, for most users, many users, kind of at what point do you think that becomes an important factor in kind of upping your data analytics capabilities?
Yeah, I guess when the need arises and you are working on a project and you say, oh, I really wish I could make this chart, or gee, I really need to make a prediction or something like that. And Power BI, it just can't quite handle it. Then that need emerges. I don't know if that happens the day that you set foot into Power BI. I mean, maybe it takes a few months. I certainly probably wouldn't recommend learning it concurrently before you've dabbled in DAX or Power Query or anything like that. But I like to say that they put it in there for a reason, right? You see those buttons there, they were meant to be used. They're not just there, for the heck of it. Yeah.
And Gaelim, what do you?
I totally agree. I mean, it all depends on, the demands of your job. I mean, you might be able to do everything in Excel, but, there does come a point where you're like, can I do more? And usually jumping into another tool or another language helps you kind of achieve that. So I just think it depends on the use case. Like if you have a project that you want to take to the next level, or you have a demanding boss, I'm always looking for shortcuts and how to be more efficient. And sometimes learning a new language will help you achieve that.
Yeah, I think for me, the threshold really was statistical analysis, that you can torture DAX into doing some statistical analysis, but it requires a lot of effort and a lot of code. And as we've talked about, you can do something that in DAX might take you 75 or 100 lines and 2 or 3 lines of Python and R. And there comes a point when it's just not efficient to keep building out more and more complex functions. That for me was the use case. George mentioned, visuals is another one. I know, Gaelim, you and I have talked about, handling really large data sets. Something that is one of those triggers that might prompt you into one of these languages. So if somebody asked you kind of, which one to study, and the nice thing is with the work you're doing, Gaelim, on the Python series for us and George on the R series, we've got the opportunity for people to take either road. And I guess the first question is it an either or choice, or is there both value, and is it reasonable in some cases to learn both?
It's a good question. Just from my standpoint, I do see benefits in both. And maybe the only reason I started leaning towards one language as opposed to another is just I found Python a little bit easier for me, but I also, learned a little bit of R. But I just found that it might have just been coincidences. I just found better tutorials that helped me kind of level up my skill in that direction. But I do see benefits in both. I think you can definitely achieve the same in both languages.
Yeah, I guess it comes down to trying them out. And if you like them, then go for it. Right. I mean, it's kind of like, should you learn Power BI and Tableau both? I mean, try Tableau. If you like it, then sure. Personally, I've always enjoyed R, and I find it a easy transition for data people, because if you take the course, you'll see that R really thinks in terms of rows and columns, and that's what we do in data, right? We like to have things in tables. With Python, you can do it. It just, you need to get into packages, and I'm sure you'll learn all about that in my or Gaelim's course. So the other thing too to consider, and I'm not saying to go to Python, but if you do a lot with Excel, there's this rumor swirling that there's going to be some sort of integration with Python and Excel, almost like how VBA is now. I could be totally wrong, but there's so many rumors about that. So that would be a nice reason to learn Python if you do a lot with Excel. But like Brian kind of hinted at, if you're really into statistics, you want to get into building predictive models and things like that, R is really great for that. I mean, Python is too. So that's a really roundabout political kind of answer, but I hope I'm getting you some heuristics around how to choose one, or maybe both.
George, it's interesting, in your book, it talks about going from Excel and Power BI to Python and R. And I'm wondering if you've gotten feedback from people who've been through the book, and I highly recommend the book. It's a really good on-ramp in a very clearly written way and very non-intimidating to kind of get you, if you're not used to this sort of programming and these sort of tools, to get you from, kind of your current space into that. But I wonder if you've had any feedback from readers in terms of which path they've taken more than the other.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, when I poll people about what they're interested in, it usually is more or less even. I think it just comes down to taste, really, and interest and background sometimes. I mean, some people have more of a background in software development or engineering, and I think Python's a good fit for that. if they're coming from some sort of a research background. Like I have a fair number of people who have some kind of academic background. Maybe they were in a graduate program or something like that. So they're really statistically, research kind of focused, and R is a good path for them. So I think, when people read both, when they read the book, they try it out, and then, based on it's like the Sorting Hat, right? With Harry Potter, something kind of clicks with them based on their own personality and what they want to do and that sort of thing.
And again, one thing you and I have talked about, and I know you're kind of in the more advanced path of the courses you're doing, you're going to be working a lot with machine learning. And generally what I've heard is you can do machine learning in both, but if that's really where your interest lies, that Python is probably the choice. Is that your take on it as well?
I mean, there just seems to be a bigger community. I might be wrong on this, but it just seems to be like when you start looking into, building machine learning models, you see a lot of things like focused on Python. But then I have people that I work with, they swear that, like they can do the things a little bit better in R and get better results. So I just think, there is a big community around the Python machine learning, but I'm sure you can achieve the same thing in R, or if so I'm not sure, but for me doing the machine learning, that the fact that you could pull up a package that was constantly updated and allowing you to kind of quickly get into, training models and optimizing models, I just felt like Python was, there's a little bit more information around it.
And what about George? You mentioned the integration features, and I know R. I don't know anything really about Python other than what I'm learning through Gaelim's course, but I know the R integration in Power BI is excellent, and Microsoft has actually invested in R. So there's the open source version of R, and then there's a commercial version of R, I believe, called Revolution, that I think is primarily for really huge data sets. That it's not something I use, but I know Microsoft has got a pretty sizable investment in the R community. And I'm wondering, just from the standpoint of the Python integration, whether you guys think the Python integration stacks up from a Power BI perspective to the R integration.
I could be wrong, but I think the R integration goes back further, and you're right, Microsoft has had longer standing ties with that Microsoft R distribution. Personally, I've had trouble getting Python working with Power BI. I'm sure in Gaelim's hands you'll be all good, but there's a little bit of it's not anything unachievable, but I think that could even be said with Python and R just in general, barring Power BI. I think Python is such a by software people for software people, and you have to download, and you're working at the command line, and it can be really kind of jarring to get up and running. R makes it pretty easy. You download a couple of things. We'll talk about it in the course, but as far as Power BI goes, there's a negligible amount more friction with Python to get it set up, but it's not like anything that is going to turn you away, I wouldn't say.
And once you're set up, the Python integration is solid, you think?
Yeah. I'm sure it'll only improve. And that's another thing that could be emphasized for either of our courses, that some of the things that you do with Python or R and Power BI are, a little duct tapey right now, but I'm sure that they'll improve in the future. Just like Power BI's improved so much.
Yeah. I do think, I think you bring up a good point, because I do think there are more limitations on the Python side, because there might be only 6 or 7 packages that you can bring into Power BI, and everything else is just kind of broke out. And I think I saw in someone's dashboard, they could actually bring in some of the interactive visuals from R.
Mhm.
You're not able to do that in Python.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good one.
So I think what I'm hearing from you guys is that both can handle the majority of use cases well, and that to some extent it really comes down to kind of a personal preference, and kind of trying it out. That maybe if you're tipping machine learning, that puts you maybe more toward Python. If you're tipping more toward advanced statistical analysis, maybe R. But that we've got with both being open source, and we've got course content coming out on both. It really gives everybody the option to just kind of try and see which one clicks with you. I'm wondering, kind of a little bit off the track here, but where you think learning SQL fits into this. If you're kind of looking to build your stack, you've got Power BI for our users, kind of the centerpiece of that. Then you've got Python and R, or Python or R in one configuration or the other. And I'm wondering kind of where you guys think learning SQL fits in, and kind of what the priority of that is relative to kind of learning that second analytics language.
I think you should learn it maybe before you dive into a second language. I just think it's one of those things that will help you a lot in your career, because you're going to be working. It's kind of like a bridge between the development side and the business side, because if you can pull data from a database, I mean, it makes you a go-to person. Sometimes you're in large organizations, they won't allow you to do that, but just knowing how the tables are brought in and how they're structured, I mean, it really makes you have a super powerful tool. And also it gives you, knowledge on joins and table structures. So I think it will help you, even with Power BI, just understanding, just the basics of SQL.
Yeah, same. That's a great thing to round out your stack. If you have a good control, if you start with spreadsheets or Excel, like many of us do, you learn some Power BI. Then you dive into relational databases with SQL, and then you top that off with some statistical programming language, either Python or R at the moment. Then that's a really solid set of skills. And it does, I think that cross training, there's something to be said for getting into SQL and understanding how, for example, joins work there. I've learned a ton with that. I kind of miss the days of access and, peeling back your join and seeing the SQL statement and so forth. So there's a lot to be said for that too.
And, I should bring up, maybe we should have had him on the roundtable as well, that Hafiz Sultan, one of our other enterprise DNA experts, is a SQL guru, and he is putting together a series of courses kind of to parallel the ones you guys are doing for us on SQL for Power BI users. But we've also got Antrik Sharma, who's our DAX, lead DAX expert, putting together DAX for SQL users. So if you're coming at it from a different perspective, where you've got the SQL expertise but not the Power BI, it's kind of like, how does what you help you learn DAX? And so we're taking both paths on that, depending on where you're coming from. But that's interesting to hear you guys, your opinions on kind of how that fits in with the discussion we're having today. So I think that's primarily all that I wanted to cover. I'm wondering if you have any additional question and any additional comments or thoughts that you want people to bear in mind as they're kind of figuring out the road they had down in their skills building.
Maybe from my side, I just think jump in and just, it might, like some people pick up programming languages quite easily, and sometimes it takes you years. I mean, but just like getting your feet wet is the best thing. I mean, I started learning those two languages, very early in my career, and I put them down and I did other things. But, that just building that knowledge step by step will help you get better at it.
Yeah, and it's not an unachievable thing. I'm sure that there are many listeners here who have written some wild things with DAX that really dwarf something that I've done in R. So, it's not necessarily more difficult. It is an open source language. So it is kind of a different worldview than working in a proprietary thing like Power BI. But I think having that exposure is really good. And if you step into that world of packages and kind of figuring out how GitHub fits in and, kind of seeing that whole worldview, it's just going to make you more conversant as a data person because depending on the teams you work with, you're going to understand where they're coming from better. So yeah, those are really my 2 words of wisdom. And I think, like we've talked about many times, either of these things are going to be really helpful. And the other thing is that we're really giving you the things that you need to know for Power BI, right? Like this is just the tip of the iceberg. So it's a pretty achievable thing. You do not need to be a coding wizard in R to really get a lot out of it in Power BI. I mean, to flip the coin, that's why Power BI is there, right? To do all those other things. And then R can handle the other part too. So yeah, I think it'll be a great complement to wherever you are with your skill set. But, depending on what you're looking to do, that learning journey might look a little different. So,
George, you raise a great point that we didn't really talk about, but it goes back to the integration, which is, I use R a fair amount, but I'm not that good with the data manipulations because I don't need to be. That I do most of that in Power Query, and then I just call the R routine from within Power Query. So instead of doing a lot of my cleaning, prep and data structuring in R, which you can do, and it's super powerful for that, I just take advantage of what I know in Power Query and then just call the R routine right from there, so kind of shortcutting. So I think, one of the things that, we've been really conscious of is not just building general course materials in R and Python, but building it specifically for Power BI users to take advantage of the knowledge you've already got. Definitely as a Power BI user, you're not starting from scratch the way somebody who's just learning, R or Python as their primary language. So, that's definitely something to keep in mind. And I can certainly speak for R that within, a very short period of time, you can start doing some pretty useful stuff without a lot of knowledge, given the ability to leverage what in Power BI. So, there's part of it that's a little, cookbooky, that once the patterns, particularly for visuals, you just kind of fill in the blanks and it pops out in the Power BI visualization. So great points. I think people are really going to find this useful. I very much appreciate the efforts you guys are making in terms of building out some great content and really expanding our offerings. And I know that we'll be, back on and, talking about other issues and conducting some webinars and, having the opportunity to kind of see how this bears out as the course series is developed. So thank you guys both very much. We really appreciate your time, and particularly Gaelim coming on late at night from Singapore. Always appreciated. So thanks very much. And we will talk with you guys soon.
Thank you.
Yep.